At 6:30 a.m., Valor Athletics was nothing but cold fluorescent lights and empty promises. The mats stretched across the floor like a white ocean, pristine and waiting. In the corner, barely noticed by anyone who mattered, Claire Rodriguez moved with quiet efficiency. Her oversized hoodie hung loose around her frame, gray sweatpants hiding any hint of the athlete she once was. The morning crowd filtered in with their designer gear and championship attitudes. These weren't weekend warriors. These were the elite, the medal chasers, the ones who lived and breathed competition. Their bags bore sponsor logos, their water bottles displayed tournament stickers like badges of honor. Claire knelt by the edge of the mat, spray bottle in one hand, towel in the other. She might as well have been furniture. "Look at that," one of the coaches muttered to his training partner, gesturing toward Claire without bothering to lower his voice. "They got the cleaning lady warmed up early today. Hope she gets under those mirrors, too. Nobody wants to smell." Yesterday's failures. Laughter rippled through the group. Not cruel, exactly, but careless. The kind of casual dismissal that comes from people who've never had to clean up after others. A young competitor slapped hands with his teammate, pointing at Claire. "Think they're using volunteers now? That's new?" "At least she's getting her cardio in," his partner chuckled, adjusting his knee brace. "Maybe she'll teach us the mop. Sweep technique?" More laughter. Claire's grip on the towel tightened slightly, but her expression never changed. She continued her methodical cleaning, each pass of the mop leaving gleaming lines behind her. The Valor Athletics logo dominated the far wall, bold navy letters surrounded by framed photos of champions and black belt instructors. Claire paused beneath those photos for just a moment, her eyes tracing the faces before she turned back to her work. A newer student, probably a college wrestler, watched her with undisguised amusement. "They could have at least given her a gym shirt. Looks like she wandered in from the street." The woman at the front desk looked up from her clipboard, efficient and impatient. "Can you finish that in 10? We start warm-ups at 7 sharp." Claire nodded once and kept moving. Her footsteps were silent on the mat, her scan systematic, checking for loose tape, uneven spots, anything that might trip up the athletes who mattered. By 6:50, the volume had tripled. Bags hit the floor, greetings overlapped with stretching routines. The digital clock ticked toward 7, and Claire finished her final pass near the north wall. She emptied the mop water without fanfare, folded her towel with practiced precision. No one thanked her. No one even acknowledged she existed. What they couldn't see beneath that oversized sweatshirt was a woman who had once stood where those champions in the photos now hung. Before life stripped everything away, before she learned that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is become invisible, she had been someone they would have recognized, someone they would have feared. But that was before Marcus died. Before their gym closed. Before Claire Rodriguez chose to disappear into the shadows of the very world that had once celebrated her. Now she was just the woman with the mop, invisible to everyone who mattered. At least, that's what they thought. Claire Rodriguez lived above Murphy's Auto Repair on the forgotten side of town, where rent was cheap and neighbors minded their own business. Her one-bedroom apartment had uneven floors and a window that never quite closed, but it was hers. In summer, the air carried hints of motor oil and brake fluid. In winter, the ancient radiator coughed like an old man with emphysema. She didn't mind. Quiet suited her now. Her mornings started with instant coffee and burnt toast. Same chipped mug, same plate with the hairline crack. The only decoration was a single photograph by the door. Claire and her older brother Marcus, both grinning in their white G's, medals around their necks, sweat still gleaming on their faces. They looked young then, invincible. That was before the accident, before everything changed. Marcus had been driving back from a tournament in Phoenix carrying her first-place medal because she'd stayed behind to teach a kids' class. A drunk driver ran a red light at 2:47 a.m. The medal was found 3 days later in the wreckage, somehow unscratched. Claire kept the photo clean, the frame dust-free. It was the only thing she ever touched with care anymore. Her closet held just enough clothes for a week. But tucked on the bottom shelf, beneath a stack of plain sweatshirts, lay a neatly folded GI and her black belt. She hadn't worn either since the funeral, not because she'd stopped training, but because something fundamental had shifted when she lost him. At night, after Murphy locked up the shop below and the streets went silent, Claire unrolled a worn mat in her living room corner. The surface was faded, edges curled, but it held memories of thousands of hours spent perfecting her craft. She moved through drills by instinct, sprawls, hip escapes, grip transitions. Her body remembered what her heart tried to forget. Then came the rope, hanging from a hook she'd installed herself. She climbed slowly, barefoot, breathing controlled and quiet. No timer, no music, no audience. Just movement and meditation. Sometimes she caught her reflection in the dark window, shoulders broad, jaw set, muscles working beneath gray fabric. The city lights blurred behind her like distant stars. When she finished, she'd sit cross-legged on the mat, eyes closed, finding the stillness that competition had never given her. This wasn't about staying sharp or maintaining skills. This was about remembering who she was beneath the grief and anger. There were reminders of her past life scattered through the apartment like breadcrumbs. A regional championship medal in a drawer beneath utility bills. Tournament photos tucked inside old magazines. Emails from former training partners that she'd read but never answered. They asked if she'd ever consider coaching again. Most just said they missed her. But the Claire Rodriguez they remembered, the one who'd dominated competitions, who'd trained alongside future UFC fighters, who'd built a successful gym with Marcus. That woman existed only in photographs now. The woman who mopped floors at Valor Athletics was someone different. Someone who'd learned that the greatest strength sometimes comes from being underestimated. Someone who was about to remind the martial arts world why assumptions can be dangerous. Each night ended the same way. Claire folded the mat, hung the rope, and wiped sweat from her neck with tomorrow's cleaning towel. She trained not to stay competitive, but because the rhythm made sense when nothing else did. Tomorrow, like every morning for 6 months, she'd return to Valor Athletics. She'd clean their mats, fold their towels, and move through their world like a ghost. They'd see her hands, her mop, her quiet efficiency, but they'd never truly see her. It was safer that way. Better. The champion who'd once submitted everyone they put in front of her lived only in the folded GI and faded photographs. The woman who cleaned floors was building something different, a life where strength didn't require recognition, where purpose didn't need applause. She was invisible by choice now, and sometimes invisible people see everything. By 7:30 a.m., Valor Athletics hummed with purpose. The front desk managed a steady stream of sponsor reps, last-minute registrations, and phone calls that all began with, "This is urgent." 2 massive coolers flanked the entrance, packed with branded water bottles. Every towel had been rolled and stacked with military precision, the gym's logo stitched in navy blue. Claire Rodriguez moved along the back wall, laying out fresh towels. Beside the equipment rack, she worked with mechanical efficiency, folding 2 at a time without looking up. Her hands moved like they'd done this 1,000 times before, which they had. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Athletes ran warm-ups in tight formations. Coaches stood with arms folded, scanning movement like scouts at a draft. Jimmy owners clustered near the office, comparing travel logistics and bragging about their fighters. The air smelled of antiseptic, nervous sweat, and something metallic, the scent of competition. Claire paused beside the supply table, refolding a towel that had slipped slightly off-center. A clipboard leaned against the wall beside her, covered in names she didn't need to read. When one towel slipped toward the floor, she caught it mid-fall. Without looking, refolded it perfectly, and continued her work. She'd already cleaned the mats. Now she was setting the stage for everyone else to perform. "He's coming through the south entrance," someone called out, loud enough to shift the energy in the room. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Phones emerged from pockets. The entire gym seemed to inhale and hold its breath. Claire didn't turn around, but she felt the change like barometric pressure before a storm. Brandon "the Beast" Thompson entered Valor Athletics with the swagger of unquestioned dominance. His black rash guard displayed a constellation of sponsor logos, each one representing another victory, another submission, another opponent who'd tapped out to his suffocating pressure. His hair was buzzed military short, and he moved with the slow confidence of someone accustomed to space opening before him. Two assistants flanked him, one carrying a clipboard, the other hauling a custom duffel bag with his name embroidered in gold. Brandon nodded at familiar coaches, exchanged practiced smiles with gym owners, and let the whispers build around him like incense. "That's him," someone breathed near the back wall. "Three-time world champion. Hasn't lost a match in 18 months. I heard he trains with that crew in Miami," another voice added, "the one that only takes pros and ex-military." A third chimed in, starstruck. "Did you see his last fight? Submitted a former UFC champion in 90 seconds. Claire arranged the final towel stack, adjusting a corner that had come loose. She didn't glance toward the commotion, but her ears catalogued every word. Near the center of the mat, Brandon clapped his hands once. The sound cut through conversations like a blade. "Appreciate everyone making the trip. This isn't going to be one of those gentle seminars where we hold hands and talk theory. We're going to pressure test everything. Real rounds, real consequences." Applause erupted immediately, bouncing off the walls and making the space feel smaller, more intense. Someone whistled. Another voice shouted, "Let's go, champ!" Brandon's smile was practiced, media-trained. "But first we get loose. Movement. Drills, positional work, then we start separating the wheat from the chaff." Laughter followed. Not wild, just the knowing chuckles of people eager to be tested by greatness. Claire stepped away from the wall and walked toward the storage closet. A few athletes moved aside automatically, more from muscle memory than courtesy. Behind her, someone whispered, "Who's the cleaning lady?" "Must be new. Haven't seen her around the circuit." "Probably just temp help. They always need extra hands for these big seminars." The comments weren't malicious, just casual observations from people whose world revolved around the mats. Claire disappeared into the closet and emerged with a crate of resistance bands, placing them near the edge of the training area. One of Brandon's assistants called out without looking in her direction, "Hey, can we get fresh rash guards for the front display? Mediums and larges." Claire nodded and headed toward the office. No one asked her name. No one noticed how she moved with perfect balance, how her posture remained centered even when carrying awkward loads, how she stepped through crowded spaces without ever bumping anyone. The warm-up began with partner drills, frames, escapes, technical stand-ups. Brandon moved between pairs like a general inspecting troops, correcting stances and offering calculated praise. Phones appeared again, capturing brief videos of the legend in action. Claire stood at the mat's edge with a rolled towel in her hands, watching, not because she needed to learn anything, but because her body had already memorized every technique being demonstrated. She'd taught these exact movements to students who'd gone on to win nationals. She'd perfected them alongside Marcus in a gym that no longer existed. Near the bleachers, a gym owner gestured toward Brandon and declared, "He's the future of the sport. Everyone else is just fighting for second place." One of his coaches added, "I'd pay serious money to watch him roll blindfolded. He'd still destroy half this room." They laughed, comfortable in their certainty. Claire didn't blink. The clock above the mirrors ticked past 8. What none of them knew, what they couldn't see beneath the oversized sweatshirt and quiet demeanor, was that they were in the presence of someone who'd once made champions tap out while wearing a blindfold, someone who'd built a legendary reputation before choosing to erase it completely, someone who was about to remind them that the most dangerous opponents are often the ones you never see coming. The seminar found its rhythm quickly. Brandon Thompson commanded the center of the mat like a king holding court, one knee down, hands moving through the mechanics of an advanced grip sequence. His voice carried easily across the room, clear, confident, occasionally punctuated by the kind of casual humor that kept his audience engaged. 40-some athletes formed a tight circle around him, hanging on every word. Even the instructors leaned in, studying techniques they'd probably never master. Brandon had presence that couldn't be manufactured, and everyone felt it. "The key," he explained, adjusting his grip on an imaginary opponent, "is patience. Most people rush the sequence. They telegraph their intentions, control the wrist first, then worry about advancement." Heads nodded throughout the crowd. Phones captured every angle. Near the wall, Claire Rodriguez continued her quiet work. restocking. Supplies, organizing equipment, moving through the space like she belonged to the building rather than the martial arts community inside it. Brandon paused his demonstration, brushing hair back from his forehead, and one of the assistant coaches stepped forward with a grin. "We need a training partner, someone light and mobile." His eyes scanned the room theatrically before landing on Claire. "How about our cleaning crew? She's already warmed up from all that mopping." Laughter rippled through the room, not mean-spirited exactly, but thoughtless. The kind of humor that comes from people who've never had to work service jobs. "Come on," someone called from the front row. "Give the help some mat time. She's probably better at wiping down surfaces than breaking grips anyway." Another voice chimed in. "This should be interesting. Hope someone's recording." The suggestions came with smiles and easy confidence. It was meant as a light moment, a brief entertainment before returning to serious training. Brandon shrugged, amused but willing to play along. "Sure, why not? Let's see what she's got." Claire understood the dynamic before taking a single step. She was the punchline to a joke she hadn't heard, the prop in a demonstration meant to showcase someone else's skills, but she placed her towel on the bench and walked onto the mat anyway. Her footsteps were silent, her posture unchanged. No nervousness, no hesitation. She simply moved to the center and stood across from Brandon with the same calm efficiency she brought to every task. The noise dimmed slightly, replaced by expectant whispers. Is she actually doing this? What's she thinking? This is going to be awkward. Brandon raised an eyebrow, his expression shifting from amusement to mild curiosity. You sure about this? Claire's response was quiet but clear. I'll need a blindfold. Complete silence. Then the laughter returned, bigger and louder than before. Did she say blindfold? Are you serious? This just got interesting. Brandon looked at her with genuine puzzlement now. A blindfold? Claire nodded once. If we're demonstrating technique, I won't need to see. The energy in the room shifted subtly. A few athletes in the second row stopped smiling. One coach, arms folded, narrowed his eyes with the look of someone trying to remember something important. Someone tossed a towel from the sideline. Make it dramatic. We're all about the show here. Claire caught the fabric mid-air without looking, her hands already folding it into a proper band. The room watched as she tied it around her head with practiced precision, adjusting the knot behind her ears like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Then she reached toward the bench where she'd left her supplies. From a small bag she pulled out a black belt, faded but tightly wrapped, clearly well used. Without ceremony, she tied it around her waist. The laughter died completely. Is that real? Someone whispered. Where did that come from? Another voice answered, suddenly uncertain. Nobody carries one of those unless it means something. Claire stood straight, hands relaxed at her sides, feet planted shoulder-width apart. The blindfold covered her eyes completely, but her breathing remained steady, unchanged. Her posture radiated the kind of calm that comes from absolute confidence. Brandon cleared his throat, looking around the room for guidance that didn't come. All right, he said, trying to recapture the light-hearted tone. Let's keep this friendly. Just a demonstration, nothing intense, but no one laughed this time. The atmosphere had changed completely. In the back row, a brown belt leaned forward. His voice was barely audible. I think we're about to see something special. The room held its breath. The mats that had echoed with jokes and casual confidence just minutes before now felt heavy with anticipation. Something important was about to happen, and everyone sensed it. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have guessed from her quiet demeanor and cleaning uniform, was that Claire Rodriguez had spent thousands of hours training blindfolded. It had been her signature with Marcus, a drill they'd developed to sharpen sensitivity to pressure, balance, and timing. She'd won major tournaments using techniques perfected without sight. She'd submitted black belts who outweighed her by 50 pounds, all while wearing a blindfold that Marcus would tie for her before each match. The woman they saw as hired help was about to remind them that champions often hide in plain sight. Brandon Thompson thought he was about to give a gentle lesson to an overconfident janitor. What he was actually facing was a former world-class competitor who'd learned to fight in the darkness, and who was about to show him exactly what that meant. The mat fell silent. Claire Rodriguez stood blindfolded in the center, her black belt snug around her waist, bare feet finding their stance instinctively. The quiet wasn't respectful yet. It was the uncertain stillness that comes before understanding. Brandon Thompson rolled his shoulders and stepped toward her, his voice carrying a thread of caution now. "Let's keep this technical. Grip work. And flow. No need to get aggressive." Claire didn't respond. She simply adjusted her footing half an inch and waited. Brandon moved first, stepping in with practiced precision to control collar and sleeve, expecting little resistance. But her balance shifted before he even made full contact. She absorbed his grip like water accepting a stone, spinning just enough to change angles and force him to reset. He blinked, smiled slightly, then attacked with more commitment. She met. His pressure with perfect timing, her hips turning to frame his motion without force. Her hands found control points as if drawn by muscle memory. When he attempted a foot sweep, she posted and redirected, slipping past the angle like smoke. A ripple passed through the crowd. "Wait," someone whispered. Brandon exhaled harder, shaking out his arms. He shot for a clinch, dropping his weight. Behind it. Claire dropped too, but faster and cleaner. She underhooked, framed off his hip, and spun into a knee shield with textbook precision. Her breathing hadn't changed. Her posture remained centered. Brandon tried to pressure through her guard. Her legs locked him in place like a puzzle piece, fitting exactly where it belonged. She reversed, posted her hand, caught his elbow, and created a frame that guided him sideways. He stumbled half a step, not dramatic but unmistakable. Claire slid underneath, swept his base, and came up into mount before he could react. The blindfold remained perfectly positioned. She kept one hand on his wrist, the other beside his head, weight distributed low, posture unshakable. The gym had stopped breathing. Brandon bridged hard, trying to buck her off. She flowed with the movement, letting him turn just enough to bait the escape. The moment he committed, she swung to his back, 2 hooks secured, seatbelt control locked before he understood what had happened. Her legs wrapped around his waist like vines claiming a tree. Brandon's hands went defensive, but her grip was already climbing. She waited just long enough for him to settle, then slipped her arm across his neck in a textbook rear naked choke. No rush, no strain, just position and pressure applied with surgical precision. She tightened her hold, adjusted her wrist, and finished the submission the way a master craftsman completes a perfect joint, smoothly, inevitably, without doubt. Brandon tapped. The sound echoed louder than any strike. Claire released immediately and rolled back, landing softly before sitting upright. Her breathing remained calm. The blindfold hadn't shifted even slightly. Brandon stayed on his hands and knees, chest heaving. He didn't speak, didn't protest, didn't make excuses. He simply nodded once when their eyes would have met. Someone in the crowd dropped their water bottle. It hit the floor with a sharp crack that made everyone flinch. Claire reached behind her head and untied the blindfold slowly, deliberately. She folded the cloth with the same care she'd shown folding towels, then set it beside her on the mat. When she stood, her movements were unhurried, graceful. Brandon got to his feet, looking at her with something approaching awe. He bowed slightly. Claire returned the gesture with quiet respect. Then she stepped off the mat. No one clapped. No one moved. The man who'd joked about mop sweeps said nothing. The instructor who'd suggested using the help as a training dummy stood frozen. Claire walked toward the bench with the same measured pace she'd maintained all morning. This time, every eye followed her movement. Near the equipment rack, a young brown belt turned to his coach and whispered, "Who is she?" The coach squinted like he was trying to bring a memory into focus. "That's Claire Rodriguez." Rodriguez? The name passed through the crowd in hushed repetition. Didn't she run a gym somewhere out east? Another voice added. Her brother died, someone else said quietly. They trained together, ran the place. As a team, after the accident, she just vanished. Understanding rippled through the room like a slow wave. This wasn't just about her choking out Brandon. They had forgotten her, actively erased one of the sport's most dangerous competitors from their collective memory. One of the seminar organizers stepped forward, his voice respectful now. Claire, would you consider staying to teach a segment? Or coming back next week? We'd be honored to have you. Claire looked at him briefly. I appreciate the offer, but I'm here to clean mats. It wasn't sarcastic or bitter. She said it like it remained true, and in many ways, it was. Brandon approached, slowly, hands at his sides. When he reached her, he paused, studying her face. You made your point, he said quietly. Claire met his eyes without challenge or judgment. That wasn't the point. He nodded, then extended his hand. She shook it briefly and released. The athletes who'd laughed earlier now looked at the floor. The loudest instructor crossed his arms, uncertain what to do with his hands. Someone retrieved the dropped water bottle and placed it gently on a bench, as if the sound had been too violent for the moment. The space itself had changed, not physically, but energetically. Tomorrow, she knew, everything would be different. She couldn't clean mats in anonymity anymore. The martial arts world had rediscovered Claire Rodriguez, and they wouldn't let her disappear again. But tonight she unrolled her training mat in the corner of the living room. She moved through her drills in complete silence. The same sprawls, hip escapes, and transitions she'd practiced for 20 years. When she climbed the rope, hand over hand in the darkness, she wasn't preparing for competition or fame or recognition. She was simply remembering who she was beneath all the noise. The woman who'd reminded a room full of champions that greatness often wears work clothes. The athlete who'd chosen invisibility over celebrity, humility over ego, purpose over praise. Tomorrow would bring decisions about what came next. But tonight, Claire Rodriguez was exactly where she belonged, alone on her mat, training in the silence, keeping alive the pure essence of what had first drawn her to martial arts all those years ago. The art itself, nothing more, nothing less. Monday morning arrived differently than any other in 6 months. Claire Rodriguez pulled into the Valor Athletics parking lot at 6:30 a.m., just as she had every day for half a year, but 3 cars were already waiting. Their occupants sat inside, watching her approach with barely contained anticipation. As Claire gathered her cleaning supplies from her Honda's trunk, maintaining the same unhurried pace that had defined her routine, the first car door opened, then another. A young woman emerged first, maybe 26, wearing a crisp white jai with a brown belt tied precisely at her waist. "Excuse me," she said, her voice respectful but urgent. "Are you Claire Rodriguez?" Claire paused, her hand on the gym's door handle. "Yes?" "I drove 5 hours to meet you. I was at the Pan American Championships where you submitted Jessica Torres in the finals. You probably don't remember, but I was in the crowd. 17 years old, just started training. Watching you compete, it changed my entire perspective." "On what was possible?" Claire studied the young woman's face, and the memory surfaced. The energy in that arena, the way the entire crowd had fallen silent during the final moments of the match. "What's your name?" "Rebecca Walsh. I teach at a community center about 4 hours north of here. We work primarily with at-risk teenagers using martial arts as therapy and discipline, jiu-jitsu as a path forward." Claire nodded slowly. "That's important work. I was hoping, and I know this might sound presumptuous, but would you consider visiting our program sometime? Not for a formal seminar or anything commercial, just to train with us. These kids need to see someone like you, someone who represents excellence without ego." Before Claire could respond, the second car door opened. An older man stepped out, maybe 65, with silver hair and hands that showed decades of hard training. He approached with the careful reverence of someone visiting a memorial. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm Tom Bradford. I was Marcus's first instructor. Back when you two were just kids coming up through the ranks. I've been looking for you since the funeral." Claire's expression softened noticeably. "Coach Bradford. I should have reached out sooner. Should have checked on you after—" He paused, gathering himself. "I heard about what happened yesterday. About the demonstration. It wasn't supposed to prove anything. I know. That's exactly why it mattered so much." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded envelope, edges worn from handling. "This came to the old academy address. The Postal Service kept forwarding mail to me for a while. I've been holding on to this for 3 years." Claire accepted. The letter, the return address, read International Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation. Her hands remained steady as she opened it. Inside was a formal invitation to the Hall of Fame induction ceremony. Her name appeared alongside legends of the sport, pioneers who had shaped jiu-jitsu into what it had become. "They've been trying to reach you," Coach Bradford said gently. "The ceremony was 2 years ago. You were inducted anyway in absentia, but they'd like you to accept the honor in person at this year's event." Claire read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into her pocket. "I'll consider it." The third car door opened. Brandon Thompson stepped out, no longer wearing sponsor gear or carrying himself with championship swagger. He looked like what he was, a talented athlete who'd been humbled and was trying to understand what that meant. "I hope you don't mind," he said as he approached. "I asked around, found out your usual schedule." "Why?" Claire asked simply. "Because I needed to apologize. Not for losing, that's part of training, but for the way everyone treated you before. They knew who you were. The jokes, the assumptions, I was part of that." Claire considered this. "You weren't cruel." "No, but I wasn't paying attention either. I should have noticed how you moved, how you carried yourself. A real martial artist would have seen the signs." "What would you have done differently?" Brandon thought about it. "I would have asked your name." For the first time in the conversation, Claire smiled, just slightly, just enough to soften the edges of her expression. "My name is Claire Rodriguez," she said. "I used to compete. Now I clean mats. Both things are true." Brandon nodded. Would you be willing to train with me sometime? Not as a publicity thing or content creation, just to learn." Claire looked at all three of them. Rebecca with her earnest dedication, Coach Bradford with his patient understanding, Brandon with his newfound humility. For 6 months she'd moved through the martial arts world invisible, forgotten, dismissed. Now these people saw her clearly. But more importantly, they saw the art the way she did, as something pure, something worth pursuing for its own sake, rather than for fame or social media recognition. "There's a small academy about 10 minutes from here," she said finally. "Community-focused. Program, mostly kids, but they have open mat sessions on Wednesday nights. Nothing fancy, no cameras, no social media presence, just training." "That sounds perfect," Rebecca said. "I'll be there," Brandon added. Coach Bradford smiled. Marcus would be proud. Claire unlocked the front door of Valor Athletics and held. It opened for them. "I have work to finish here first. But after that—" She paused, looking back at the place where everything had changed. "After that, maybe it's time to step back onto the mat." As they walked inside together, Claire realized something fundamental had shifted. She was still the same person who'd chosen invisibility over recognition, who'd found peace in simple work and quiet training. But she was also someone who could bridge those two worlds, the champion she'd been and the teacher she was becoming. The mat still needed to be cleaned, towels still needed to be folded, but now those tasks felt less like hiding and more like preparation, getting ready for whatever came next. 3 hours later, when the first athletes began arriving for morning classes, they found something unexpected. Brandon Thompson, one of the most dominant competitors in the sport, helping a quiet woman in gray sweatpants finish mopping the last section of mats. Neither of them spoke. They just worked together in comfortable silence, two martial artists doing what needed to be done. When they finished, Brandon bowed slightly. Claire returned the gesture. Then she gathered her supplies, slung her bag over her shoulder, and walked toward the exit. At the door, she turned back one more time. The gym was filling with students now, young and old, beginners and experts, all of them stepping onto clean mats to pursue the same art that had shaped her life. Some would compete, some would teach, some would simply train for the joy of movement, for the meditation of struggle, for the quiet satisfaction of improvement. All of them mattered. All of them belonged. The air and Valor Athletics felt different, charged with the recognition that something significant had occurred. Claire walked back to her supplies, picked up the towel she'd folded earlier, and wiped the sweat from her neck. She placed it in her bag, untied her belt with the same precision she used every night at home, and folded it carefully. No one dared interrupt. She didn't speak again. She didn't need to. As she moved past the edge of the mat, younger athletes stepped aside, not with fear, but with reverence. One looked down at her folded belt, then away, humbled. "She was here the whole time," someone murmured near the exit, "and we never really saw her." That was the truth that would follow them home, that would change how they looked at training, partners, at opponents, at anyone who moved through their world quietly. The seminar continued, but the lesson everyone remembered had nothing to do with grip sequences or technical demonstrations. It was about recognition, respect, and the dangerous assumption that greatness always announces itself. Claire Rodriguez had reminded them that champions often hide in plain sight, and that the most powerful people are sometimes the ones who choose to remain invisible. Word spread through the martial arts community like wildfire through drought-dry brush. By evening, phones across 3 states were buzzing with calls, texts, and social media posts that appeared and vanished just as quickly. Videos from the warm-up session circulated showing a woman in a blindfold, but no one had captured the actual submission. The moment had been too sudden, the silence too heavy for anyone to think about recording. The only evidence was the memory, burned into 40 witnesses who still couldn't quite believe what they'd seen. At Iron Dragon BJJ across town, instructor Mike Patterson pulled up old tournament footage on his laptop. "Rodriguez," he muttered, scrolling through results from 5 years earlier. "I knew that name was familiar." The video showed a younger Claire, hair pulled back severely, stepping onto a tournament mat with quiet confidence. Her opponent was bigger, more aggressive, known for overwhelming pressure tactics. The match lasted 87 seconds. Claire absorbed every attack, redirected every assault, and finished with the exact same rear-naked choke she'd used that morning. The tournament crowd had gone wild. The camera caught her face as she stood, calm, focused, almost serene in victory. "She was supposed to be the next superstar," Patterson told his assistant coach. "Then she just disappeared off the face of the earth." Similar conversations were happening in training rooms from California to New York. Old-timers pulled out faded photographs, scrolled through archived forums, made calls to training partners they hadn't spoken to in years. The story began to crystallize. Claire and Marcus Rodriguez had opened their academy in a small industrial town 3 hours east of the city. They'd trained together since childhood, developed innovative techniques, produced multiple champions. She was the technical mastermind. He handled promotion and business development. Then Marcus was killed in a head-on collision while driving back from a tournament in Denver. Claire had stayed behind to teach a children's seminar. He was carrying her gold medal when the drunk driver crossed the center line at 2:47 a.m. "I heard. She blamed herself," one coach told another over FaceTime. "Marcus was making the drive so she could stay with the kids." "Survivor's guilt," another added, "destroys a lot of athletes when they lose someone close." But they didn't understand the complete truth. Claire hadn't quit because she was broken by grief. She'd quit because losing Marcus had stripped away the filter that had protected her from seeing what the sport had become, a circus of social media promotion, ego-driven politics, and manufactured drama that had nothing to do with the art itself. Marcus had been the buffer between her and all that noise. Without him, she'd seen too clearly what modern martial arts really was, a place where skill was measured by Instagram followers, where respect was earned through trash talk and promotional stunts. So, she'd walked away, found the humblest position. She could in the industry, cleaning mats at seminars, restocking towels, emptying trash cans. She'd made herself invisible in the one place she'd once been most visible. It was her own form of rebellion, her way of staying connected to the pure essence of training while rejecting everything shallow that surrounded it. At Valor Athletics, owner David Park sat in his office, staring at the employee paperwork from that morning. Claire's information was written in plain block letters under Support Staff. No credentials listed, no background verification, just a phone number and a local address. He'd hired her 6 months ago when his regular cleaning service had become too expensive. She'd shown up precisely on time every day since, worked without complaint, never asked for overtime or special accommodations. Now he realized he'd been paying one of the most accomplished grapplers in North America minimum wage to mop his floors. His phone rang. The caller ID showed another gym owner from 2 states over. "I heard something wild happened at your seminar today," the voice said without preamble. "Something about a janitor who submitted Brandon Thompson." "Where did you hear that?" "News travels fast in our community. Is it true?" Park looked out his window at the empty parking lot, still processing everything. "It's true? What's her name?" "Claire Rodriguez." A long pause. "The Claire Rodriguez? From Rodriguez Brothers Academy?" "I guess so." "Jesus Christ, David. Do you understand what you have there? Do you know who she is?" Park was beginning to. "I'm starting to figure it out. She won every major tournament on the East Coast for 3 consecutive years, submitted everyone they put in front of her, had offers to train with the top teams in Brazil. Then she just vanished completely. People have been wondering what happened to her for years. She's been mopping my floors. Not anymore, she hasn't." The conversation ended there, but Park knew the caller was right. Something fundamental had shifted that morning. The secret was out, and Claire Rodriguez would never be invisible again. At her apartment above Murphy's Auto Repair, Claire sat on her futon with her folded GI in her lap. Her black belt rested across her knees. She wasn't touching either item, just looking at them, remembering. Her phone had buzzed 17 times since she'd gotten home. Calls from numbers she didn't recognize, text messages from people who'd somehow gotten her contact information, emails flooding into an account she rarely checked, offers to teach seminars, invitations to train with elite teams, requests for interviews, sponsorship deals. Everything she'd walked away from was rushing. Back like a tide she couldn't stop, she turned off the phone and placed it in a drawer. That Wednesday night, Claire Rodriguez returned to the mat, not as a janitor or a champion, but as what she'd always been, a student of the art, ready to learn and teach in equal measure. The small community academy was exactly as she'd described. No corporate sponsors, no social media presence, just worn mats and fluorescent lights humming overhead. When she arrived at 7 p.m., Rebecca, Brandon, and Coach Bradford were already there, along with a handful of local practitioners who'd heard whispers about the legendary fighter emerging from retirement. The academy's owner, an older black belt, named Maria Santos, greeted Claire with quiet respect. "I've heard the stories," she said simply, "but here we just train. No politics, no drama." "Sound good?" Claire nodded. "That's exactly what I need." For the first hour, she simply observed. Rebecca worked with a teenage girl on basic guard retention, her teaching patient and encouraging. Brandon drilled with a purple belt, focusing on fundamentals rather than flashy techniques. Coach Bradford sat on the sidelines, offering gentle corrections and sharing stories from the old days. When Maria asked if Claire wanted to roll, she stepped onto the mat wearing her faded GI for the first time in 4 years. The fabric felt familiar against her skin, like putting on a favorite jacket after a long winter. Her first partner was a blue belt named David, maybe 22, who had no idea who she was. He approached the match with respectful intensity, not holding back but not trying to hurt her either. Claire moved slowly at first, rediscovering the rhythm of live sparring. She swept him gently, transitioned to mount with minimal effort, then allowed him to escape and reset. They flowed together for 6 minutes, Claire offering subtle adjustments to his technique between exchanges. Your guard recovery needs work, she said quietly as they slapped hands afterward, but your pressure is excellent. Keep developing. That? David smiled, unaware he'd just received coaching from a former world champion. Thanks. You're really technical. Word about the Wednesday session spread organically through the community, not through social media or promotional campaigns, but through the kind of quiet recommendations that matter most in martial arts. Athletes began making pilgrimages to the small academy, not seeking fame or Instagram content, but genuine improvement. Claire established simple rules: no phones during training, no discussing competition records, no ego-driven behavior. Anyone could train with her, regardless of skill level, as long as they approached the art with respect and humility. She worked with white belts, struggling with basic movements, and black belts refining advanced concepts. She taught the same blindfold drills that had made her famous, but emphasized the mental clarity they developed rather than their competitive applications. The blindfold isn't about showing off, she explained to a group of fascinated students. It's about learning to feel pressure, to respond to timing rather than visual cues. In life, we often have to make decisions without seeing the complete picture. Brandon became one of her most dedicated students, arriving early and staying late. He'd won more tournaments than most people could name, but under Claire's guidance, he began to understand the difference between winning and mastering the art. I thought I knew jiu-jitsu, he confided to her after a particularly challenging session. Turns out I just knew how to compete. Competition is one expression of the art, Claire replied, but it's not the only one, and it's not the most important one. Rebecca brought her at-risk teenagers to several sessions. Claire worked with them patiently, understanding that many carried trauma that made physical contact difficult. She taught them that strength didn't require aggression, that control could be gentle, that martial arts could heal as well as harm. One girl, barely 16 with defensive posture and wary eyes, approached Claire after her third session. "I've never had anyone teach me something this important," she said quietly. "Nobody ever showed me I could be strong without being angry." Claire felt tears threaten for the first time in years. "That's the most important lesson in martial arts," she replied. "Everything else is just technique." 6 months after her emergence at Valor Athletics, Claire received another letter. This one came from the International Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation, formally requesting her to accept the Hall of Fame induction in person at the upcoming ceremony. She sat in her small apartment, holding the invitation while her GI hung on a hook nearby, no longer folded away in shame, but displayed as a reminder of who she was and what she represented. For the first time since Marcus's death, Claire picked up her phone and dialed the number on the letterhead. "I'd like to accept," she told the surprised official on the other end, "but I have conditions." The ceremony took place 3 months later in a grand ballroom filled with the sports elite. Claire walked to the podium wearing a simple black dress, her Hall of Fame medal around her neck, facing an audience that included every major name in martial arts. Her acceptance speech was brief. "I disappeared for 4 years because I forgot why I started training. I thought martial arts was about proving superiority, about defeating others, about being recognized as the best. My brother Marcus died while I was chasing those empty goals. I found my way back to the art by cleaning mats, by serving others, by remembering that true strength doesn't announce itself, it reveals itself through actions, through humility, through making others better." To the young athletes here tonight, your trophies will tarnish, your records will be broken, your fame will fade. But the character you build on the mat, the respect you show your training partners, the wisdom you gain from both victory and defeat, those things will define your legacy. Train hard, compete if you choose. But never forget that the most important battles are fought not against opponents, but against your own ego, your own limitations, your own assumptions about what makes someone worthy of respect. She paused, looking out at faces she recognized. Some humbled, some inspired, all listening. The janitor who cleans your mats might be a former champion. The quiet training partner might be your greatest teacher. The person you overlook might be exactly who you need to learn from. In martial arts, as in life, pay attention. Everyone has something to teach you. The applause that followed wasn't the polite acknowledgement typical of such events. It was sustained, genuine, transformative. People rose to their feet not just to honor Claire Rodriguez, but to acknowledge the truth she'd reminded them about their art and themselves. After the ceremony, Claire returned to her small apartment above Murphy's Auto Repair. She hung her medal next to the photo of her and Marcus, two reminders of different kinds of achievement. The next morning, she returned to her routine, training. In her living room, teaching at the community academy, living simply and purposefully. But now she did so with the understanding that visibility and invisibility were both choices, both forms of power. She'd learned that the strongest people are often the ones who choose to lift others up rather than tear them down. That true mastery isn't about dominating opponents, but about elevating the entire art. And that sometimes the most important victories happen not in competition, but in quiet moments when you help someone discover their own strength. Claire Rodriguez had taught the martial arts world that champions can wear many uniforms, sometimes a GI, sometimes work clothes, sometimes the simple dignity of someone who serves others without seeking recognition. The lesson would outlive any tournament result. Never underestimate the person beside you, because greatness often chooses to hide in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to remind everyone what true strength looks like. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.